Hey guys, welcome back to Home Built, and today we get the Ferrari engine and then we start trying to tear into it. So this big black lump, I hope, is my Ferrari engine, and the first challenge is going to be getting it off of the trailer because they used the forklift to put it on, but now I have to see if I can actually get it off and without damaging it and getting it into my garage. So time to start opening my Christmas present. Now the first challenge I have on this engine is that there is, unlike Japanese engines and American engines and stuff that generally have places you can bolt onto it to pick this thing up. I believe this engine may originally be designed to be dropped out of the bottom of the car, so it's not really designed to be picked up simply. They don't have nice attachment points to lift it up from. So that presents its first problem, and what I'm thinking I'm going to do is down under here, see under here, here's the factory engine mount. So what I'm going to do is you can see here I've wrapped a strap under the engine mount and sort of come up around the exhaust header. I'm going to take off the coil packs so that I'm not putting any pressure on the coil packs and don't want to wreck them. I don't know what they're worth, but I assume they're not cheap. So I'll take the coil packs out and do the same on both sides, lift it up, but also have another strap the other way so that it doesn't sort of rock over and tilt out of it. And that is my current plan on how to pick this thing up. Well, that wasn't going to work. I didn't really think this through, because as soon as I get it off, I can only lower it down onto the legs of the engine hoist. I can't actually get it onto the ground. So that is going to require me to come up with another plan to get this off of the trailer, and that means I'm going to have to get it off of the pallet because I can't leave it on the pallet and get it on the ground. So let's work something out. Well, that worked much better. Thinking about it beforehand really helps. Now it is on the pallet, it's nice and stable, so that can stay where it needs to be for now. All right, so now I've got it in place. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the gearbox. Now, there was lots of talk last time. Like I mentioned, you couldn't use the Ferrari transaxle. It just is too long, it won't work. And it's really expensive, and you basically can't find it in manual. If you do, you're going to be paying, you know, as much again as what I paid for the engine, just for the gearbox. It's just not realistic. Which brings me to other gearboxes that I could use on this engine. Now, there's a few issues with this engine that I discovered pretty early on, because I've been planning this out for quite some time now. I wanted a gearbox that wasn't extremely heavy and really large, because I am working with a little car with a small tunnel now. I realise I'm probably going to have to enlarge the tunnel, but I just, something like a T56, which is actually something I was thinking about, which is a GM, you know, we get it in a Commodore here, GM big chunky gearbox. It handle a lot more power than this thing can throw at it, but it's enormous and really heavy. And the big issue that I came across with this particular engine is the way the Ferrari is set up. Most cars like the Datsun and like most sort of front engine rear wheel drive cars, have the starter motor mounted to the side of the engine. Now, the Ferrari doesn't do that. The starter motor is actually the other way. It's actually mounted to the side of the gearbox. If I did get something like a T56, I'd have to get a custom-made bell housing or cut out the bell housing and make a mount for a starter motor on the gearbox side, because there's just no room here and there's not going to be any room in the engine bay. So that got me trying to work out what gearboxes would work and what gearboxes are decent for a rear-wheel drive car. They're not too heavy, but still good enough. A modern gearbox that's got lots of aftermarket support, and it has the starter motor mounted on the gearbox side. And there aren't a lot of options, but one that did come to mind, and I've actually got, I will show you right now. And this is the gearbox that I'm going to be using. Now this is, as you can see, it actually has a starter that mounts up onto the gearbox side of the engine, and it's a 6-speed. This is actually out of a Toyota GT86 or a Subaru BRZ. This is, it's not a bad sized box. It's a 6-speed, and I think it should do the job quite nicely. Now, it is, looking into it, this being a 400 horsepower engine, these things seem to break on cars that have 300 or 350 horsepower at the wheels. These things start breaking third gears if you're mean with them, so I might need to do something about the internals of this in the future. We'll see. They last okay as long as you're not mean to them. If I'm really mean to it, then I might break it, but they're readily available, and there are gear sets for them that make them handle a lot more power. So I think this is a good option. It's a nice gearbox. It's a nice small package. A couple of the things that I did like about this, I can't remember my terminology here, but basically with the input shaft into the center of the gearbox, this actually sits outwards and proud of the bell housing of the gearbox. Now on the Ferrari actually sits quite deep in. So basically what that's going to mean is when this is sticking into the center of the crank on the Ferrari, there's going to be quite a gap between the lip of the gearbox and the edge of the engine, which is perfect for me because it's going to give me space to be able to build an adapter plate that I can then bolt onto the engine and then bolt the gearbox onto that. So I think it should be reasonably successful. So my plan is to try and get a custom flywheel that's basically just an 86/BRZ flywheel that I can get drilled so that it bolts up to the Ferrari crank, and then I can just use from there back, just use Subaru parts, just use Subaru starter, Subaru clutch. The whole thing will be off-the-shelf parts that are readily available and easy to replace. So the only custom parts, hopefully to join it up, will be a flywheel and a custom adapter plate. So I have never done this before, so it's going to be fun. Okay, I'm going to come back and finish playing with this a bit later because it's time to go and pick up the Alfa. Okay, so I have finally come down to pick up my car from the sandblasting. Now I say sandblasting, and lots of you were having a lot of issues with me saying I'm getting my car sandblasted and it'll ruin the car, and there's a big difference in sandblasting. You can get basic blasting, you can get sandblasting done cheap, but cheap means fast and not necessarily done properly. And John down here at Advanced Abrasive Blasting has really helped me out. He's definitely not cheap. There's definitely cheaper guys out there, but the thing is you really have to get someone who's going to take the time, and most people just don't take the time. And I'll show you through some pictures of exactly how he's gone through and repaired this car, so you can sort of see the difference in just getting something blasted and getting it done properly. So I go through now and you can see how the car started and the process that John goes through to take back a layer at a time, because one of the biggest issues with sandblasting cars is that people go at it hard from the start and they end up warping all the panels, and you're just rolling the dice with how you're going to get the car back. John actually stops the whole way through, and he sent me over 600 photos of this car during the whole process. He really wants to show that every single part is done to the nth degree. But even the detail he goes to with the bonnet, he's gone through and took back layer upon layer. You can see as he goes through, and he found a little bit of rust under the lip. And what he's done is he's gone through and lifted the lip up, blasted underneath, and then tapped it back down again. So there is no rust in any of the crevices on this car. It is immaculate. If there's seam sealer, he goes through and scrapes it rather than just trying to blast it off, because that can end up doing more damage. So yes, blasting can cause more damage than good, but if blasting is done well, it can be much nicer than dipping, because that can leave residue that's going to come out of the seams for years to come. So John actually called me. He was partway through blasting this door, and you can actually see some of the layers and how he blasts everything. You see sort of this, the bare metal in the center here, but there's all this body filler down here. This sort of green stuff is all body filler. You can just see how much damage. There's sort of rust spots here, the rusting through, and he contacted me. He got that far, and he's called me, and he's like, this door skin is just complete junk. And he actually cut it off the door and did the door separately to that, so that it actually is all done properly, and I can just replace the door skin. So basically down here, this is the blasting booth here. So this is where all the initial blasting gets done, and then it gets moved all over here. We have the paint booth where all the priming and everything gets done. So this is where the edge primer, or in my case I've got Keyphos on the car. That's all done over here. So the car's already loaded up on the trailer, and I'll go over it in detail when I get back home, but basically he's really taken his time to go in and repair everything. Even things like under here, he's opened this up. There was a bit of rust in here. He's actually peeled that open and blasted inside, so I can just hammer that down and re-weld it up, and there's not going to be rust deep in the crevices of the car. And that's what really makes the difference between basic cheap blasting and getting it done properly. So overall, I'm really happy with what John's done. I'll put a link in the description to the shop here, and if you want to get good blasting done, he's, I might say, eccentric when it comes to blasting. He really wants to take his time, and he knows every little detail and uses a bunch of different methods and really goes to town. He finds one little bit and he'll pick at that edge and make sure that there is no hidden rust anywhere or anything. It's quite detailed, but he's really good. So I'll put a link in the description, because these guys, they really take their time and really do it properly. And if you're doing something that's worth doing, it's worth doing properly the first time. Yeah. All right, so the Alfa is back home finally, and the good news is that John did a fantastic job of blasting the car. The bad news was what was actually underneath and how much was being hidden. There were so many layers of bog and stuff in there. It's just crazy. Now we need to go and actually have a look at what he discovered underneath. That's not so good. Okay, for starters, you can see this whole front end is really nasty. It's really mangled. It's been badly repaired at some stage earlier. It's it's definitely not pretty in there. You can see here that was where the battery tray was. He removed the battery tray, and under the battery tray, quite common on these, it's all completely rusted out. So lots of repair work to go in there. Nose is all mangled. Down underneath here, this is a piece of square tubing that is not supposed to be in there. It's just sort of been chucked in there. So all of that's going to have to be pulled out. But I may have to modify this to fit cooling systems and stuff anyway, so I'm not too concerned. And you can see where they repaired it. It's all rusted since. This side is marginally better than the other side, meaning it's really still junk. But I can get a full new nose cone for this, so that's what I'll be doing. This guard has been repaired sometime before. It actually looks like quite a decent repair that's been done here. So that's actually not too bad. I can work with that and maybe tidy it up a bit more, and that'll be good. This stuff we knew about, these small rust holes and stuff. It didn't seem to go much further. The floors overall are really, really good. The only little bits is the little bit in the corner there and that corner there. Again, stuff that we knew about. The rest of the floor is rock solid. It's really good. And even in the back, it is really good. Coming to the back here, this rear quarter, there's some ripples here, and yeah, some really nasty repairs here. The whole edge is gone on here, and this whole back end, it's all that. This side, this whole quarter is pretty much toast. Around the back window is not pretty at all. That looks, you can sort of see where he's peeled it up and sort of got the rust underneath the edges up there, but there's still quite a bit that needs to be tidied up there. This is where it is quite nasty. You can actually see that the car has had a decent hit in the rear, so you can see it's all buckled and cracked and damaged there. And even back over here, that was never repaired properly. It was just, I think it was just bog over here or whatever, and they hadn't actually repaired it at all properly. Same in this corner, you can see it's all, he's pulled it apart there to get to blast in and get all the rust out from in there. But you can see it's all needs a lot of repair. I think I'm going to remove this entire rear boot floor and start again. All right, so we've established now that this is going to take a lot of panel work to get it looking its best, which I'm up for the challenge on that. I think it's all doable. All the parts, replacement parts are available, which is fantastic for these cars. So I want to get back over to the engine and work out what we're going to keep and what we're not going to keep. On this engine, obviously this came with everything, but I'm not going to use everything on this car. I'm swaying more towards not using the factory ECUs because I think it's going to be a real pain to actually work around the immobilizer and a lot of the other bits and pieces that all talk to each other that are going to be a bit of a pain. There's a few other bits and pieces I'm not going to use. I'm not going to use the power steering pump. I'm not going to use the air conditioning condenser. I'm not going to use the exhaust manifolds here. So I'm going to start stripping that stuff off of the engine now to get it back down to what we're actually going to keep. All right, we've got it all stripped down to what I was looking for. It brings me to one of the big questions that was brought up and something that I wanted to know the whole time is, what's the weight difference between the engine that I've just taken out of the car and this engine I'm going to put in? They're both alloy block engines, and obviously this is going to be a heavier engine. I'm certain it's heavier. It's just a matter of how much heavier and how much am I going to ruin the weight balance of the little Alfa. So let's test it. Okay, so I went and bought myself a hanging scale. I'll put a link to something similar in the description if you're interested in one of these things. I believe it's got a 300 kilo load rating, so it can actually weigh these engines. I very much hope that they don't weigh more than 300 kilos. I'm pretty sure they don't. Let's connect it up to my engine crane and lift this thing up and see how much the factory 2-litre engine weighs. 148.5 kilos. And while we're here, let's weigh the factory gearbox as well and just see what it weighs, so we have a good all-round measure of the difference. 33.3 kilos for the gearbox. Okay, so I've got the numbers on the Alfa engine and the Alfa gearbox. So there are going to be a few differences. The Alfa has a clutch and flywheel on it, whereas this engine doesn't. So I've put a factory clutch, like a factory BRZ clutch. The real one's probably going to be a bit heavier than what this one is because it's going to need to be a bit heavier duty. But it's still something. It doesn't have a flywheel on it, so there's going to be discrepancies there. But at least we're going to get a ballpark figure on what the differences between the two are. So let's start jacking and see what we got. And the magic number is 175.4. Okay, and finally we've got the Subaru gearbox that we're going to be using, and I put the starter motor on it to try and keep the weights as close as we can to the final values. 42.4 kilos. So that is really, really interesting. A lot of you are worried that this thing is there's a massive lump, it's going to make a massive difference to the weight balance of the car. And to me, I don't think it's definitely going to be heavier. There are lots of other factors that come into play. There's going to be 2 exhaust manifolds instead of 1. It's probably going to have slightly bigger cooling, so you're going to have more water up the front. There's lots of other factors, so it is going to be heavier than the original one. But 148 kilos to 175 kilos is not a massive difference. 27 kilos at the front. The gearbox is 9 kilos heavier. We're not talking a crazy amount of weight. I really don't think it's going to throw the weight balance of this thing out too much. And you're talking a car that weighs, factory this thing weighs 1,044 kilos, I believe. We're not talking ridiculous differences. I'm feeling good about this, and I think it's going to be a really fun little project. All right, well, that's enough of me blathering. I think it means it's time for Fun Facts with Mrs. Jeff.
Hey guys, in 1928, Alfa Romeo's namesake, Nicola Romeo, left the company and it floundered until the government rescued it in 1933. Alfa Romeo became a national emblem of Mussolini's Italy, and during this time they built bespoke vehicles for the wealthy, with bodies by Touring, Zagato and Pininfarina. The pinnacle of these cars was the 8C 2900 Type 35. This was a 2.9 litre straight 8 version of the 8C, fitted with twin superchargers and a stated power output of 220 horsepower. This was detuned from the Grand Prix racing version and was first shown to the public at the 1935 London Motor Show. Scuderia Ferrari entered 3 8C 2900As in the 1936 and 1937 Mille Miglia, taking up the top 3 spots in 1936 and the top 2 spots in 1937 as one of the cars didn't finish. Only 10 2900As were built, and in 1937 Alfa started building the 2900Bs, which were designed to be more comfortable and reliable and taken down to 180 horsepower. 32 of the Bs were built, and the 2900 series remains some of the most valuable cars in the world today.
All right, so a few surprises there in this episode. The car, not as great as I was hoping. There's a lot more work in fixing it than I wanted, but...
This is always the way though, isn't it? Like you're always like, oh, it's just going to need a quick coat of paint and...
Yeah.
It always needs way, way more. But...
It will get done. But the weight difference on the engine, I was actually quite surprised myself. I thought it was going to be a lot more than that. And when I mentioned it to Mrs. Jeff,
I was like...
it said 27 kilo sort of weight difference between the two engines.
And I was like, oh, that's actually just the weight of our golden retriever.
Saying it's the weight of one retriever is actually sounds like quite a bit. But if you think that the Alfa originally had 6 in the front and now it's just going to have 7, that's not that big a difference.
It kind of is. She's really heavy.
All right, well, I know I promised a 911 video this week, but because I had to pick up the Ferrari engine and the Alfa, I sort of got distracted. But the next episode, I am going to be starting on the 911 engine. So looking forward to that. Woohoo!
Yay! Hey guys, we hope you're enjoying the show. If you are, please like and subscribe, and you can follow us on Facebook,
Instagram, and
sporadically.
Have a look in the description. Join us on Patreon. You can get to watch these videos a day early, and it really helps us out because this stuff is not cheap. All right, guys.
A lot of dog food.
Yeah, that's right. See you guys.
Yes. Well, you put a full stop there. Stated fitted output power. Shut up. It's irritating. Stop laughing. Oh, it's hard. Where's my water cue? So close. So close. This is a hard sentence. Yes. Yeah.